Hey buddies, thanks for joining me again today. We're doing some crazy ass hip openers, and sometimes I don't trot very many of these out during my yoga classes because in the demographics that I teach, I have a lot of people with replaced joints and just limited range of motion. So these are some that might be familiar to you if you're in my classes, and some of these might be something you haven't seen before. I have two yoga sandbags. They're 10 pounds. You can have them 1, 5, 10, however, whatever size you want to get. You can buy the bags at yogaaccessories.com. I don't get paid anything to say that. I don't get paid anything at all for the videos that I do for you. And you can also buy the sand on yogaaccessories.com. You can get it at any hardware store like Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace, something like that. Or if you don't want to commit to the sandbags, just buy a 10-pound bag of potting soil or birdseed or dog food or something like that, something maybe you already have in your house, and they will serve exactly the same purpose. I'm going to start with a wide-legged legs up the wall. So legs up the wall is our very good friend for our hamstrings, but now we're going to get into the inner thighs as well. So the same routine, I'm going to get whichever hip and shoulder I like up against the wall. I'm going to lie all the way back, and then I'm going to throw my legs up the wall, but I'm just going to let gravity and body weight take my feet and legs where they want to go. So you might end up more up here, that's fine. Your hip socket will sort of stop you. And so I'm getting a nice big stretch right from the center of the attachment here, all the way out. I'm getting a little under the knees. I'm still getting it on my hamstrings a little bit, but mostly I'm getting it on the inner thighs. I'm feeling it more around the hip socket here. And so we're just letting gravity and body weight do this work for you. If you like, if you're not quite getting all the way up the wall, if your knees are bent, you just sort of push into your knees to get a little bit of an extra stretch. You don't have to have completely flat or straight knees. You don't have to be flush to the wall. If you don't end up quite all the way on the wall, you can just give yourself a little push and let the muscles kind of get used to what you're asking them to do. You don't ever have to stay here very long. Anything more than 0 is good, but the longer you stay here, within about 5 to 10 minutes, will really be beneficial. You don't want to stay here too much longer than 10 minutes because your feet might start to fall asleep, and you don't want to compress too many of the nerves and blood vessels. You've got some pretty major ones in your legs, so we don't want to stay too long. So set a timer if you're tired. Don't fall asleep here and wake up in a few hours and end up feeling pretty poorly afterwards. So I'm just going to sort of push myself off the wall and come to seated. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the sandbags. And again, I have 10-pound sandbags because I'm pretty flexible and I have really big hip sockets. So if you are not very flexible, you have smaller joints, you might like to start with a 5-pound and then take it from there. So I'm just going to get kind of an even distribution of sand in the bags. I'm going to just drape it over my knee. And this was really helpful to me. I had a pretty significant leg injury in 2017, and I wasn't able to move around very much. And so I got pretty tight, and my knees were kind of up by my shoulders for the first time in my life. And so working with the sandbags was really helpful in buying back my old flexibility. And I was fortunate to be able to return back to my old flexibility. That's not always true with injuries. So the sandbags can be really helpful to you. So I mentioned, while we're just letting gravity and the weight of the sandbags do its thing, I'll yak at you for a moment. So a lot of people just naturally end up with their knees by their elbows or shoulders. Their knees don't come all the way down. They don't fold out like a book. And that's quite normal. And some of it can be to do with your flexibility, but often it's more about your osseous tissue than your soft tissue. So If the femoral head has a lot of room in the acetabulum, the socket of the ball and socket, so this is your hip socket, this is the top of your thigh bone. If you've got a lot of room to move it around, you can just splat yourself open. But if that ball, if that socket is a little more tight, you're just not going to move around as much. So you might not ever be able to splay your knees out very wide, even if you are quite flexible. So, the sandbags might get you a little further, but they may never get you all the way to the floor, and that's fine. This is just a function of how your body is shaped, and it's nothing to do with strength or flexibility. So give yourself permission to end up wherever you end up on your journey. Any experience is correct unless there's pain. So again, you don't have to stay for very long to get the benefit, but I would find that 15 to 20 minutes, if I could stand it, worked really well. And usually about the time that you're starting to get kind of antsy and kind of uncomfortable and feel like that's when good things are happening. And that usually happens around the 10 to 15 minute mark for me. That was my experience, so I would try to stay for 20. And look at me now. So the next thing that I like to do with the weights is to help for the external rotation. So pretend my hands are my feet. And if I have my feet sticking out in front of me, some people, their toes just point straight up at the ceiling when they're completely relaxed. Some people are internally rotated, their toes fall in towards one another. And for me, I am super externally rotated, so my toes fall away from each other. And for a lot of people, they're sort of in between this straight and here, but they want more. So if that's true for you, so like ballet dancers, for example, are always wanting to work on their turnout. So I'm going to take my feet, so you can see that mine just sort of naturally fall out to the side almost completely. But let's say you start right about here. You're going to get the sandbag, just make sure you can handle the weight. And again, just let the sandbags do their thing. You don't have to do anything except sit up nice, straight, and tall. You really don't want to round out and be on your sacrum. You want to be on your sitting bones, those ischial tuberosities. By the way, kids, lots of yoga teachers will refer to these as the sits bones. There's no such thing as a sits bone. They're sitting bones. More specifically, they're ischials, and even more specifically, they're ischial tuberosities. So don't go to the doctor and talk about your sits bone because they won't be able to find it. So we do want you up on your sitting bones, back nice, straight, and tall. Bonus, you're working your core, and that's what's keeping your spine up. It's fine if your knees naturally bend because, again, you might be real tight through the hips. That's why you're watching this video. You might end up with your knees kind of bent and your thighs aren't making contact with the floor. That's fine. If you want, you can sort of baby step your way into it and put the weights on the knees first and then take them down to the ankles, and that's fine too. You can really play with these sandbags, and they're really versatile, and if you have another person to work with you, it's even better because then you can get into position and sort of coach them about where to set this. So we're going to set the sandbags aside, and the next thing that we're going to do is, this is sort of a variation of both pigeon and threaded needles. So some people are just so stiff and flexible on the back side of their body that nothing really happens. They don't really feel much of anything when they're in threaded needles or pigeons. So you just sort of grab your leg at your knee and at your arch and pull it to your chest. So I'm really pulling with my elbow, pulling on my foot toward my shoulder. So I'm one of those people not hugely tight in my hips, so I'm not feeling much of a stretch because I don't need it. The stretch sensation exists to tell you if you're about to go too far and hurt yourself. So since I've got plenty of room, I don't have a lot of stretch, but the stretch that I do have is sort of right here in the rump. So I'm in my medius IT band. I can feel a bunch of stuff that's connecting at the trochanter that's just sort of being stretched. And you can just love it and kiss it and call it George and whatever. So you look like you're maybe cuddling a puppy dog or something, but you can move this towards and away from you. You can draw little circles in the air with your knee, and when you are holding the weight of your leg with your hands, the stuff that you're moving around is connective tissue, so your muscles aren't engaged because they're not holding the weight of your leg. That work is going on in your hands. So your muscles are loose, they're not engaged, and you're moving around like ligaments, tendons, things like that. Or back and forth, that works too. And we'll change sides. So again, you don't need a whole lot because this can be a really intense stretch. Some people feel it more in the inside of the hamstring more than the outside of the hip. That's fine. You might feel this more in your low back than any place else, and all this stuff connects. So that is an okay experience as long as, again, it's not painful. And you really, I'm compressing, I'm not just resting here, I'm really using the muscles in my arm to pull my foot as close to my shoulder as it'll go. So I'm not, it sort of looks deceptive. It looks like I'm just holding something, but I'm really actually deeply engaged through the upper body to try to torque this as much as I can. So again, you can towards and away, kind of build up to it. You can stir it around, see, and this will kind of give you some information about how big your ball and socket area is. And you might get some pops and clicks as ligaments and tendons kind of roll over the bone. They'll make a little poppy, snappy sound or sensation. Back and forth. Now, I worked against myself, and last night we did a lot of jockey rides and football runs, so I'm really tight near the hamstrings. I'm so sore. So I'm not gonna have perfect form for this. So this is one of those do as I say, not as I do things, okay, kids? If you really wanna push the boat out, you've got those big loosey-goosey hip joints, and you don't feel a lot of stretch when you are in pigeon threaded needles or hugging your shin to your chest. The only other place to go is to put the ankle behind the head. And it's a great party trick. Also, I don't know the rules on this, but if you're on Match.com, why not use that as your profile pic? So ideally, we want your back to be nice, straight, and tall. I'm already naturally long through the torso, and I'm unnaturally short in the hamstrings right now. So I'm gonna have to lean forward a little bit, but I do wanna demonstrate this for you. So my form won't be perfect. Again, do as I say, not as I do. So you're just going to approach this the way that you did the other one. Just as much as you can. I'm gonna have to lean my head forward to get it behind today. Sorry. And now I can just pull my toes down toward the floor. Usually I'm sitting up straight, but I'm pretty rounded through the spine right now. And this is a pretty intense stretch no matter who you are. We want you to find that place where it's intense, you're sort of pushing up against the edge of your ability, but we don't want you to lose the will to live. Oh, that was terrible. So, although my hamstrings will later thank me. So, the next thing we're going to take is frog, and frog is another thing that I don't teach very often. I've got a lot of knee replacements in my classes, so you might like to get two hand towels or kitchen towels and have one each under your knees. So we're taking something called frog. So you start in all fours, and you'll notice I've turned to the long side of my mat because my knees are going to come out as wide as they can. If you're facing the short side of the mat, you're going to end up with your knees on the hardwood or the tile, or if you're on carpet, it might not matter. But since I'm on hardwood, I'd rather not be. I'd rather be on my mat. So I'm going to take my knees as wide apart as I can, and my feet are directly behind the knees. One thing that I see a lot is people will get into frog and then they'll tuck their toes in. That is not allowed. That's just asking for a snapped ACL, and we don't want that. So your feet need to be directly behind your knees, and flexed. Once you get here, the suffering's not over. Now you've got to come onto your forearms and you're going to push your hips back towards your heels the way you would for child's pose. So it's super intense right here. There's just not a lot of good ways to get real deep into the hips if you're already pretty flexible, pretty open hips, pretty big joints. Sometimes you got to get creative. Now you've got to come up very gingerly. So come up onto your palms first, and then you're just going to very gently maybe walk your heels in a little bit first, then start to walk your knees back together. So I'm going to turn around to the side so you can see what I'm doing. This is baby frog. And for my sticklers out there, this is not tadpole, it's baby frog. So you're going to come onto your belly, and you're going to tuck your heels as close into your pelvis as you can. So it's like, and my arches are touching the floor. And for a lot of people, you'll look like this. You'll just sort of look like your feet don't touch the floor, ankles aren't even close. That's fine. That's that lack of external rotation that you're experiencing. If you have a lot of external rotation, super open hips, just put your feet on the floor. So to come out of this, I'm just going to extend one leg out straight, and then the other leg out straight, and I'm going to press up and back to all fours. So Hamanasana, this is named after the monkey god Hanuman. And if you have hardwood or tile, you might like to have blocks for your hands and a towel under your foot, and you can sort of slide on the towel. I don't need that. Either one of those props, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to straighten out my right knee as much as I can. So thirsty giraffe is a good alternative. You just drop your forehead to your knee from here. Or you can now walk your hip out in front of your knee. So for me, I have my right leg extended, and I'm now going to take my left hip out in front of my left knee. And you'll notice that I'm just doing the splits. And this is Hamanasana. Now I keep my hands on the floor because if I take my arms up overhead as you do in the traditional Hamanasana pose, it just seems to really bother my knee for some reason, and we are always nice to our knees. We never do anything that makes them unhappy so that they won't leave us. Now you can change sides either by coming through center and just flipping over, but I kind of prefer to start from all fours just in case, like today I'm a little more tight and sore than I typically am, so I kind of want to sneak up on this. And here again, you've got these situations where one side you can go deeper than the other, and that's true. I'm not quite touching the floor on this side, and that's okay. And I've got my weight in my hands so that I don't put any undue pressure on my knees. But not only are you getting the hamstring stretch here, you're getting the front of the hip here. And again, you can come through to center, just kind of make sure everything's realigned before we come back up. We're going to come into a downward facing dog and take wild thing. So it's going to stretch out the hip flexors, the front of the hips. And again, we're using gravity and body weight to our advantage. So all fours, downward facing dog. And I'm going to start on my left because that way you can see it in the lens better. You're going to kick up one of your legs, bend your knee, and then I'm going to let my left heel sort of pull over to my right elbow. And what I'm feeling is this big stretch on the front of my hip flexor on the left. And if I just really wanted to, I could reach back and grab my left foot if it wouldn't
get out away from me. But today I'm just letting the pull happen with gravity. So we'll change sides. We're in down dog. We kick up one foot, bend the knee, and just sort of, I'm not letting my shoulders come with me too much. I mean, if I wanted to grab my foot, I could, but we don't want one shoulder to take the brunt of your body weight. You really want to make sure you've got your weight fairly evenly distributed through your hands as much as you can. And if you wanted to, you really could drop your foot all the way back, but most people don't like to, or feel like that's not available to them. So we're coming into garland pose. People with bad knees tend to not take garland pose, and that's fine. I'm actually gonna start from the side and then scoot to the front. So you're gonna get your sole of your foot on your mat in such a way that your knee is right over your ankle, your ball of your foot is on the hardwood or the floor, and your heel is on the mat. You're gonna rinse and repeat. And you're just gonna drop your hips down between your knees and your ankles. You can even use your elbows to push your knees back behind you, and that's a really good way to prep for that frog pose that we did. So let me do this from the front so you can see how I did it. Just step and step, and you might stay right up here. You might be able to drop down here, and again, you've got the ability, if you want it, to push your knees behind you. You get a really big stretch in through the hip socket area. Sorry about the sniffles. It's a windy day and all the red cedar from Texas is coming up. So variation on this theme is Spider-Man. So I'm just gonna come up a little bit so that I can take my feet wider. And I'm gonna drop through, and I'm really gonna sit into one side, and then I'm gonna lift up with my core, take it through center, and drop it on the other side. You can just go from side to side, like so. And then you can come through center, and I'm gonna roll myself up. One thing that's really nice to do for hips, it's also good for hamstrings, is instead of your traditional forward fold where you're just taking your hands forward, and this is a nice diffuse stretch down the backs of the thighs. It's also nice to cross one foot in front of the other. So I cross my right ankle over my left, and what is happening now is my right knee is slightly bent. I'm gonna pull my right hip back toward the wall behind me, straight back, and it's just gonna feel really intense on my left side. So you can have your hands at your knee if you need it, or on blocks, or if you can, drop it all the way forward. And change sides. So again, you're just using the hip to pull back behind you. That keeps the knees safe, but now you're experiencing the stretch of that back leg. And bring it up. So we've done some things from the ballet tradition because we have the turnout and external rotation. So you're gonna start with your feet parallel to one another. I mean, you can't really see my face, but you're really needing more to focus on my feet. You're gonna start with your feet pointing forward parallel. Leave your heel on the floor, pick up one ball of your foot, and just go to the extent that it wants to go, set it down. And the same thing on the opposite side. Pick up the ball of your foot, point your toes out, set it down. Now, a lot of people will get this effect, and we don't want that. We want your hips right under your shoulders, so that'll determine how far you go. Another thing that will determine how far you go is if your knees and your toes are going in the same direction. So what I will often see happen here is something like this. So the knees are pointed forward, but the toes are pointed out to the side. That's gonna buy you a new knee. So you're gonna actually move from the hip. So my femur is aligned, it's facing forward. Now I'm rotating my femur out to the side, and then I'm rotating my femur out to the side. I'm pulling in with my belly button and tucking my tailbone under, squeezing my cheeks straight into my knees, and now I'm in first position. If first position works for you, excellent, we can move on to fifth position. If first position is something that you're working towards, that's fine. And it doesn't have to be a complete flat line. It doesn't have to be like a 180. You can have your feet sort of in a little bit more Charlie Chaplin style, and that's okay too. If you have a lot of good external rotation, doesn't matter which side you want to start on, but you're just going to get one foot so that it's pointed out to the side, you're externally rotated from the hip. You're going to do this same thing on the other side, just right in front of one another. And again, pull in with the belly, tuck your tailbone. This is not an option. This is just pulling on ligaments and tendons that don't like to be pulled upon. And we'll change sides. So now this foot's going to be in back, this foot's going to be in front. And I'm a little tight today, so I'm really feeling this stretch on the fronts of my hips. You might feel it on the backs, but just where I'm feeling it right now on this side, kind of on the side and back, and on this front side on the front. Good. And release. So I hope this was helpful to you. I hope this gives you some new ideas. You can sort of riff on anything. Just play with stretches and see if you can't find a deeper stretch someplace, or just make shit up. That's fine too. We're happy to just invent things that work for us. So I hope this gave you a jumping off point. This certainly is not an exhaustive list of hip openers. There's more where this came from, so stay tuned for more videos. Rock out with your workout.